Hello, I'm Blue Flame, and I make videos about whatever I want. Part of being a theme park fan is imagining what you would do if you had control, if you could make a park exactly how you want it. And sometimes it's even better working with limitations. Limitations breed creativity, and working with an already existing park and structure always makes ideas that I have feel more real, concrete, substantial. So I'm going to do a thing that many have done before. I'm going to outline my ideal version of Universal Studios Florida. This park could be a lot better than it is. A lot of people love this park, but it's agreed upon that it probably has the most problems in the resort. And it's going to be even more overshadowed when Epic Universe opens, with it being the shiny new park that's just so well thought out. And Epic Universe's development is probably the reason why Studios Park hasn't been getting as much attention. So here's my ideas for improvements to Universal Studios Florida. I should preface by saying this isn't an original idea. Vincent Vision is the big one I've seen who's done this exact thing before. Watch his videos on Islands of Adventure in Universal Studios Florida. Some of his ideas gave me ideas of what's plausible with space. I have some differences with my approach. I'm more focused on the actual layout of the park in terms of what goes where, and I'm more ride oriented than he is, what the actual attraction list of the park is, where he has a wider scope of the whole experience with things like character breakfasts and overlays and things like that. I was going to point out every time his video had the same idea as mine, but instead I'll just play this chime. There is a lot of overlap, but there's a lot of ideas that are good ideas, and ideas that almost everybody in the theme park community wants to see happen or have been suggested before, or rumored a whole lot that I'm just going to repeat, because I also share those opinions. If there is any plagiarism happening, it is not intentional, or at the very least, not done with malice. And remember, everything is just ideas, and this is just for fun. This is not actually going to happen, and I don't think it will happen. So starting at the entrance to the park, we enter into Minion Land. And the first thing we're going to do is something that we just got leaked permits for, the removal of Rip Ride Rocket. And we're going to replace it with a new coaster. The rumors say we're going to be getting Ghostbusters, but I think I'm going to tie it into Minion Land. I specifically want it to be an Intamin steel launched roller coaster, specifically a similar model to California Screaming or Incredicoaster at California Adventure, which is designed to look like a classic wooden coaster, but it's actually a modern steel coaster. And this would be the Super Silly Fun coaster from Despicable Me. I think the whole idea that was used in California Adventure, where it looks like a wooden classic coaster, makes it much more in line with what Super Silly Fun Land is meant to be in the movie. I don't know if it would have that one inversion that Incredicoaster has, but it would be a pretty big family coaster, not as intense as either of the coasters in Islands of Adventure. The first step up towards those, and add in some Midway games too in front of it to create a Super Silly Fun Land addition to Minion Land. Alright, keeping it going, I want to replace VillainCon Minion Blast with a dark ride, but I have a unique idea for this dark ride to still theme it to VillainCon. We're going to be going on a tour of VillainCon on trackless vehicles, going through booths, mainly with characters on screens in different sets, and you'll pass all the villains in their booths and experience scenes and vignettes for each of them. There can be little comedic bits with the minions doing something to mess up a villain's booth or something that a villain does themselves, and the story will be that this is a VillainCon happening right now, in modern times, not in the past like the Minions prequels. All the villains are still alive as seen in Despicable Me 4, so the story is a bunch of villains have broken out of the AVL prison, and Gru and Lucy, as AVL agents, are going undercover to VillainCon to catch them. So you'll meet Gru and he'll be wearing some sort of obvious disguise, and he'll pull off a wig and he'll be like, "It's me, Gru," and he'll explain to you what's going on. And then you'll help him through the ride. And you'll be trying to get back your special device of some sort, just a MacGuffin, and watching out for all the places this little MacGuffin goes throughout the ride to give it some cohesion. And in the last scene, Gru exposes himself and captures all the villains. I think it's a pretty good concept. That's it for Minion Land. Next we move on to New York. First thing, I'm getting rid of Jimmy Fallon, and we're going to keep the ride system and replace it with something still in New York. We're bringing Ghostbusters back to Universal Studios. Now, I am not the biggest Ghostbusters fan, so you'll have to work with me on this. I'm basing this off of my limited knowledge. This will be the same simulator, and it will still take you flying through New York, and it will revolve around a new ecto vehicle that can fly and drive and go underwater, just like the vehicle that Jimmy Fallon drives. And you're going to join the Ghostbusters in using it to protect New York from ghosts. So all the crazy set pieces that you fly through will be caused by ghosts rather than things that just seemingly happen randomly on Race Through New York. Here's what I don't know. I don't know what to call this vehicle. According to my research, there's already an Ecto 2, Ecto 3, and Ecto 4 from the comics and other supplementary material, and I don't want to be confusing. I was going to go with breaking the conventional number system by calling it the XOX or something like that, but that's already a thing. The next available number seems to be Ecto 6, which just seems kind of random. I'm really picturing a more high-tech version of the Ecto 1. So that's something you can tell me in the comments, what to name this vehicle. Another thing I don't know is how we'll deal with the actors appearing in the ride. Now, we could minimally have the actors appear and just have their voices as we follow through the car in New York with them yelling back at us, but we're going to want to see them somewhat, and I don't think it's the right play to use a more modern set of Ghostbusters because while they've been making new movies, I don't think that any of them have taken off. I think it's the right play to use the original Ghostbusters, so I think we might have to use digital de-aging, as minimally as possible and with the consent of the actors, of course. I don't really see any other way around it. The biggest downside to taking out Fallon is removing the queue with all of the night show history, but I think that's the sacrifice we have to make. I think we would try to reroute the entrance to the ride through the firehouse and then connect it into the same space. I don't really know what the layout of the building is like, but if possible, I'd make it so guests are entering through the firehouse because it fits better, and then you can have walk-through elements in the firehouse, build a new queue that fits the Ghostbusters better, and then enter the ride. Next in New York, The Mummy is staying, nothing wrong with that, but Transformers I'm removing. Transformers doesn't really live up to the potential of this ride system, and doesn't show off the IP in the best way in my opinion. Sentiment seems to be that it's poorly paced, so I think we can do better. We're going to move Transformers to a different place in the resort, but we're going to replace Transformers 3D with Metroid, the Nintendo property. Metroid wouldn't be able to carry a land, but it can carry a ride. And a ride with this system where you're sneaking through in scooped vehicles would be perfect. You can make it feel dark and cramped, and we would base it off the newest game, Metroid Dread. And you'd be going with Samus through a cramped facility trying to evade the Emmy robots, and every time one is closing in on you, the scoop would whisk you away to the next scene. The problem with this is, why is Metroid in New York? There really isn't a good reason. Transformers has a better reason to be in New York, being that the Transformers visit Earth, but Metroid is entirely disconnected from that entirely. This was just something I really wanted to see, and I thought it was the best fit for this ride system, so I'm doing it anyway, even though it's slightly out of place in New York. Last thing in New York, we're going to make a version of the Secret Life of Pets dark ride next to the Mummy by removing some restaurants and using the two-story tactics Universal uses in Hollywood. This is another thing that Vincent Vision added, and he explained how it would be possible with the space, but I'm also going to do it. Even though this is an idea that I wouldn't have thought of if not for him. So this is entirely to his credit. Secret Life of Pets Off the Leash is a great dark ride, and it takes place in New York, so it would fit great here and add a quality dark ride for families on top of the Minions dark ride we already added in Minion Land. Moving on to San Francisco, whose only attraction is Fast and Furious Supercharged. And of course, in a perfect Universal Studios, I'd replace Supercharged. But unlike everybody else, I don't want to see a roller coaster. I'd rather have Universal try to replicate the slot car system that Disney uses in Test Track and have a similar ride where it's a hybrid dark ride with a fast bit at the end, where you're sneaking through the city, meeting up with characters at brief moments, possibly smuggling something, a very grounded plotline more in line with the first films. Fast and Furious is another franchise I don't know a lot about. You're going to have to bear with me through a lot of this video. At the end, you'd be running it while being chased by the cops, and if necessary, we'd add an outdoor tunnel similar to Test Track that goes outdoors and into the backstage area for a more high-speed section. But unlike Test Track, it would be completely covered, and you'd have minimal theming, like bursting past street signs and things like that. Kind of like Rock and Roller Coaster, and you'd have police lights flashing behind you. Now, I actually have to credit this idea to a completely different source, that being this podcast called Theme Park Shuffle, who did an episode where they were re-theming Disney attractions to Universal IP, and they turned Test Track into a Fast and Furious ride. I had to reuse the concept because I thought it was a perfect Fast and Furious attraction. You should go check out the podcast. I don't think they're actively making episodes anymore, but the ones they have are good, fan-made, armchair engineering sort of content. I hope they don't mind me reusing their idea, and I hope they also don't mind if I reuse the name they had for it, Fast and Furious Red Line. Continuing in our circle around the park, we go to Diagon Alley, and I'm not changing anything there. It's probably one of the best theme park lands out there, so we're going to move right onto the plot where the Fear Factor live stage was. And this is where we're going to be building a new Transformers attraction. Transformers is another brand that I'm not extremely familiar with, but after seeing Transformers 1, I deeply wanted to see Cybertron, as it's shown in the movie, translated into a theme park ride of some sort. And this ride isn't going to be based on Transformers 1 specifically. I don't think it's likely, seeing how it performed at the box office despite being a really good movie. But we are going to take inspiration from it and keep some of the design principles of the movie and how Cybertron is displayed, and we'll sort of do an RTX on that will portray the same design in a more realistic, detailed style. But it will have many of the same concepts. It's going to be a simulator attraction because of the space we have, and I simply think it's needed to portray what I want from this ride. It wouldn't make sense for you to be going to Cybertron as a human. Instead, you're going to walk in and you'll basically become a Transformer. Either you're inhabiting a Transformer for the purposes of the ride, or through this ride, you're accessing a Transformer's memories and replaying them. And you're going to go on a high-speed race through Cybertron and up through the surface, like how things are shown in Transformers 1. And maybe it would be like Iacon 5000 race, where it's literally a race in Iacon. Maybe not. I don't know the lore, but you could have some classic characters be there, and I think we always want to see more of Cybertron. That's the environment that's so astounding, and that's what a theme park should translate. So I hope that this would appeal to Transformers fans, assuming that someone who knew more about the brand, not me, oversaw it to make sure it was the best it could be and fit it in with the lore of the series. So if you're someone who's really invested in Transformers, please tell me in the comments what the best lore behind this attraction would be, and if I'm getting anything wrong and this wouldn't be plausible. Next, we come to Men in Black Alien Attack, and this ride is predicted to be leaving the park soon. I think it did get a refurbishment, but it's still been rumored to be one of the next ones out on the priority list. So I am going to replace it, and we're going to keep it a shooting gallery attraction, but we're going to use a newer, more relevant IP, Splatoon. Splatoon lends itself extremely well to a shooting gallery, and while it isn't one of Nintendo's heavy hitters, it's actually really big, probably in their top 5 franchises, despite being so new, which is even more of an accomplishment. I feel comfortable putting some of these smaller Nintendo properties at multiple places in the park, because despite it not being Universal IP, it's a much less risky investment compared to Men in Black, which isn't as relevant anymore, and Splatoon will sell a whole lot more merch. We'll dial up the outside of the building, not changing it much, but putting in some collapsed beams and covering it in splatters of paint, making it look like it's part of the post-apocalyptic world of Splatoon, and then inside we're going to use a new ride system. The Men in Black ride system can't really get new parts, and it's getting old. It's not wise to keep the system. Instead, we'll do a screen-based shooting gallery, more similar to Toy Story Mania or Web Slingers. I know people don't like screen attractions as much, but I think that the vibrant and rapidly moving world of Splatoon is better captured in screens, and it would be forgiven if you have a polished, quality shooting gallery. You'd be whisked through different scenes from the world of Splatoon using ink cannons mounted on your vehicle to shoot at salmonids. At the end, you'd get your high score, classic shooting gallery stuff, and there'd be tons of effects and colors. Each person on the vehicle could have a different color of ink, so you can tell what you're shooting and what others are shooting. I think this type of attraction and IP go so well together. If we continue in the direction we're going, we'd come to Simpsons Land. But I'm going to skip Simpsons Land because I'm not going to change much in Hollywood and DreamWorks Land, and I want to save something big for last, so we're going to come back to Simpsons Land at the end. DreamWorks Land is pretty new and it's a fine land. There's just one thing we need to add: flat rides. DreamWorks Land is meant to be the kids' land of the park, and Troller Coaster is the only real ride. I won't specifically list flat rides and how they would be themed, but compare DreamWorks Land to the kids' land for Islands of Adventure, Seuss Landing, and it has the carousel and One Fish, Two Fish. Give kids more to do in this land by adding flat rides. If you find places to fit them, they would add great capacity and make this land that much better. And one more thing, if we're changing DreamWorks Land, make a better sign. Make it 3D and in a nice shiny blue color. The current sign just looks a bit flat. Hollywood isn't changing that much either. We really can't add anything incredibly significant with the space we have. It can stay as is. But while we're here, let's talk about E.T. E.T. needs some work, but they haven't touched IT because Spielberg won't work with them anymore if they get rid of it. But maybe we can go to Spielberg and be like, hey, we know you love this ride, but it could really use some TLC. We won't get rid of E.T., but we close it for a little bit and sort of redo it and make a newer E.T. dark ride with better effects and our modern capabilities. And hopefully he'd say yes, because E.T. doesn't need to be removed, but I would refurbish it. And now we can go back to Simpsons Land. As most of you know, the contract will expire in 2028, it needs to be replaced, and Disney just put out a survey gauging interest for Simpsons attractions in their parks, so we know it's on its way out, and of course we're going to put in Pokemon. I've already put a lot of Nintendo in my plan, but this is the big one. The others are supplementary, but Pokemon is one of the big three. Everyone assumes, based on logic, that Universal will want one of the big Nintendo properties in each of their 3 parks, so this makes the most sense. And Simpsons Land is basically being completely bulldozed. I don't think we're keeping much of anything. We're going to give ourselves the most space possible by using the whole of Simpsons Land, as well as swallowing the Animal Actors building into this new land and cutting into some backstage area if appropriate, because this IP is the highest grossing IP in the world. It deserves it. We're getting rid of the simulator ride used in The Simpsons. It's too old, it's been around since the park opened, and it's time for it to go. I am a Pokemon fan, but I find it kind of hard to design a land around it. But I'll share my ideas anyway. First, we're going to do a Pokemon Dark Ride. The show building for this will probably be what cuts into the backstage areas the most. A lot of people have suggested a Pokemon Snap theme ride, but I originally didn't think taking pictures would be a mechanic that translate well into the ride. But then I realized the ride I was going to make would basically be a Pokemon Snap ride anyway, just without taking pictures, and Nintendo seems to want their attractions to have a gamifying feature. So I caved. Let's make it a Pokemon Snap ride. Also in the land will be a Pokemon Center that's a restaurant, and the Pokemart will be the main retail location. Another little restaurant would just be a Pokemon Cafe. There's this spin-off matching game themed to a Pokemon Cafe, and it's not a big thing to the identity of Pokemon, but the opportunity to have a quaint little cafe where Pokemon look like they're working there and you eat cute little pastries with Pokemon faces on them, it's too perfect, it's too wholesome, we have to do it. Another attraction would be called the Pokemonorail, which would essentially be the high-in-the-sky Seuss Trolley train ride, but for Pokemon, and it already has the perfect name. You go through multiple scenes with Pokemon getting into hijinks and see the land from above. My one worry is that you're basically doing the same thing in both rides, because presumably on the Pokemon Snap ride, you'd go through multiple vignettes of Pokemon being cute and doing stuff. So here's my addition to shake it up. Throughout the land, there will be screens and interactive places where you can catch Pokemon, just like the new interactive elements at Super Nintendo World. It can either work exclusively through an app or use a new Pokeball wristband, maybe incorporated with Pokemon Go. These interactive elements need to be here, but they'll also carry through into the Pokemonorail, where you'll scan your wristband or your phone when you enter, and you'll pass through scenes that have practical elements, but there will also be screens, where the Pokemon you've caught can appear and interact in some way with the scenes. And you'll be looking into buildings and seeing Pokemon do like regular jobs that are tailored to them. I want to add one more attraction, and that's another family coaster. I think the best way would be to go over the water, and while the Universal Studios Lagoon is thinner, it's actually a bit bigger than the one in Islands of Adventure, and I don't intend to create that big of a coaster, so there's still plenty of room. This would be a coaster that's closer to the ground, smaller than the Super Silly Fun coaster we talked about earlier. I think it would be a straddle coaster. You'd be riding a Pokemon, but I'm not sure which Pokemon. If we wanted to base it on the newest games, a straddle coaster where the trains are Miraidon and Koraidon, the Pokemon you ride all throughout the game, it would fit well. And we could even have 2 tracks in a pseudo-dueling kind of way, but I don't know if we want to do that. Being that it's so new, it won't be the newest game for long. We might want to focus on older, more recognizable elements from the series. It could be any Pokemon that can be ridden, but after looking over some of the Pokemons that are rideable in the game, none of them seem that iconic. Tell me in the comments what Pokemon you would use for this coaster. Finally, in this Pokemon land, for some final touches, I'd have a little interactive area where there's a Snorlax animatronic. It would have little breathing animations, and there would be tiles that you can step on that make noises. And if you play a specific melody on the tiles, the Snorlax will wake up for a moment and make roars, and then using the app or interactive systems, you'd have a chance to catch a Snorlax. Maybe fit in some other flat rides if you can squeeze them in too, but I know I'm pushing it for this land, so I'll call it a day for now. This concludes my ideal version of Universal Studios Florida. Here's the final map. Thanks for bearing with me. I'm sorry I took so much inspiration from other people. I'm sorry I changed so much, but thanks to Vincent Vision for basically giving me this idea. I'll link his videos, and I'll also put a link to the Theme Park Shuffle podcast in the description. Make sure to tell me your input. I want to hear what your ideas are, whether you agree with me or disagree with me. I did give you some questions already, and I intend to do Islands of Adventure next and go through the whole resort. So maybe if someone suggests something good, I'll add an addendum and put it in that video. Thanks for watching. See you next time.